My name is Dr. Peter Carter. I'm here in Vienna. I have two presentations at the 2017 EGU. That's the European Geosciences General Assembly. This is their big scientific conference that they put on once a year around this time. And I've got an oral presentation with a paper to make. And I'm really happy that this time the committee, the EGU committee, approved me leading a town hall meeting, which is a big meeting. It's a very big thing for me because it's open to all the scientists. And my theme that I'm leading town hall in is the climate and oceans emergency, which is what I've been working on for a number of years. So yeah, this is really a big thing for me to be here doing that at the EGU. Well, that's a great question, and unfortunately it remains a great question because the scientists are only too ready to acknowledge that we still have not done a great job in communicating the most important realities about what we call climate change. The public still does not have the degree of knowledge and confidence in what they understand about climate change to push their politicians hard enough for their politicians to really get serious about doing something, because we still have a massive political inertia. We're in an emergency situation. There's no question about that. And really, we don't have any of our leaders doing anything much. And unfortunately, of course, in the United States, being the second greenhouse gas polluter, probably going to be the first again soon, you know, we have now a new government, which is a total across the board, dangerous climate change denying government. So in North America, and as North America goes, so goes the world, we really do have to have a very well-informed public. One of the problems is that the science, we have tended to present the science in terms of complex modeling, and as soon as we start talking about modeling, the public quite understandably says, oh boy, this is beyond me, you know, I can't really understand what this is. So one of the things I'm particularly doing at this conference is not talking about projections, which tends to be what the science course is all about, which is very reasonable. But now we're in a situation in which we have decades of established bad news. We have decades of established data. The data, there's no question about. It's direct measurements on the ground, in the oceans, from satellites, absolutely unconvertible. And that the public can get to grips with. You know, the public can understand temperatures going up, ocean acidification going up. What I'm going to be explaining, unfortunately, to the EGU is that everything, all our data, all our indicators, as we call them, of global climate change and ocean change, all our indicators are sky high. They're all getting worse. And the most important ones are not only getting worse, they're accelerating. So the public absolutely has to get informed upon this. I think the public really wants to know, wants to understand what's going on. The public almost intuitively knows that things are bad. Polls in the United States and Canada show that. So, yep, we got a big job to do in telling the public what they really have to know. Now, the number one thing that actually the public has to know and that can understand is not a data. It's actually food security. And that applies to everywhere in the world. It certainly applies to the United States. In the Northern Hemisphere, which was supposed to be a lot less vulnerable to climate change, in the Northern Hemisphere since 2000, we've had multiple extraordinary disasters. Russia, China, North America, United States particularly, in Europe, right across the well-to-do world. And it's hit temporarily these extreme weather events have hit our crop production very, very badly indeed. This came out of the fifth assessment of the IPCC. I'm an expert reviewer of the IPCC. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the body which is the authoritative body on climate change science. And that was a bit of a shocker, because the fifth assessment found that most of the regions in the world, and possibly all the regions, were experiencing negative impacts to their crops, to their crop yields. And then last year, I'm from British Columbia, Canada. Last year, research from Canada, led by University of British Columbia in Vancouver, did a huge study across the world in which they found, yes, these extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, severe storms, are affecting crops everywhere, but they're actually affecting crops in the global north, in the northern hemisphere, more severely than elsewhere. So food security is something which is coming out more and more and more in the media, all over the world. It's general. And that's the most important thing, actually. If there's a single most important thing that the public really needs to understand, it's what is most important to us as well, which is our food security. And then, of course, they need to understand that we're actually not just looking at climate change. Terrible though global climate change is, we're into a lot more than global climate change. Atmospheric greenhouse gas pollution, which is constant, which is continual, it actually affects the entire climate system. So the oceans are undergoing terrible hits as a result of atmospheric greenhouse gas pollution. So are our forests. And so the public needs to get the big picture. The public's actually quite good at getting the big picture. The scientists tend to be so super specialized nowadays that it's very difficult for science actually to adapt itself so that it can get the big picture on the whole of climate change. And it's climate change and ocean change and land change. It is everything. Climate change is absolutely everything. So that's a key fundamental importance for us to communicate. One of my presentations, I have a lead paper in this presentation, and it's a paper that was published about 18 months ago, and it's a paper on tipping points. And it's a paper I really, really like, because, not only because tipping points are certainly terribly important, but because this paper made strong recommendations, which is something that climate scientists tend not to do, which frustrates me a lot, because for the public needs to hear what do we need to do, right? So in climate change science, tragically, we have a kind of ridiculous situation in which the experts are avoiding telling the public what to do. That's changing now. It needed to change for a long time. So this paper is making strong recommendations based on avoiding tipping points that the paper says we could already have passed. So the paper recommends a 1.5 degree C limit, not 2 degrees. 2 degrees is climate crazy, we know that now. They recommend that emissions be pushed down to about 0. There's nothing new on that. The IPCC recommended that in 2007 in its fourth assessment, and again in 2014 on its fifth assessment, that CO2 and the other long-lasting greenhouse gases had to be brought down to about 0, quote unquote. This paper is a huge paper because it says we've got to do that by 2050. Now we know we can do that by 2050. Look at the renewable energy breakthroughs. We're literally having breakthroughs, it seems to me, about every month. And renewable energy is just going like, I suppose, what would we say in North America, like gangbusters or something like that, you know? It's absolutely astounding, the progress that is being made with renewable energy development and technologies and science. And that is with really very little encouragement, actually, because renewable energy gets a pittance in the way of help from governments. All the big subsidies are going to fossil fuel energy still. That's insane. The tipping points is always actually been a big part of climate science. Tipping points and the concern about tipping points goes back 20 years. What's happened is that we've realized as the science has developed and as the impacts to various planetary structures have increased faster than anybody anticipated, the science has come to realize that these tipping points are, far too real. And now we have a few more of them that we know about than we knew about 20 years ago. So a tipping point is a thing that really, the phrase people can pretty well understand. One of the characteristics about climate change, about greenhouse gas pollution, has always been that a very small increase in atmospheric greenhouse gas levels tends to produce huge increases on the scale of the planetary systems. Now that may not be immediate. It may be an effect that actually comes down 20, 30 years from what people would regard as a sort of slight relative increase in atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations. So there are a lot of those tipping points. Now, most of the tipping points are in the Arctic. Sea ice, we passed that tipping point. So we passed one tipping point already, and it's a really big one. The sea ice is declining very, very rapidly. It's on a record low again this year. Sea ice, of course, refreezes and builds up over the winter. So last year, March, is the time when the sea ice is built up to its maximum, and then it tends to decline after March. This year, 2017, the March build-up was an all-time low, and it was quite a large low, and it's still tracking a new record low as we go into the spring and the summer. Sea ice is the tipping point which we have always known about. Global surface warming is going to melt the sea ice away. As the sea ice disappears, all its reflective property of reflecting all that energy back into space, we're talking millions of square miles of sea ice, that not only disappears, but it gets replaced by dark open ocean, which then absorbs heat. The result of this is what's called Arctic amplification. We hear from the scientists that the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. That's a sort of out-of-date number, that's a sort of average over 100 years. Right now, the Arctic is warming 3 times as fast as the global average. There are regions in the Arctic that are warming 4 times as fast. This winter, the World Meteorological Organization made a statement which was it was a good statement, but it was an extraordinary statement from scientists saying, we have had 3 heat waves in the Arctic this year. So the Arctic's a massive tipping point. It's the tipping point of tipping points, because as we get more temperature increase in the Arctic and more ice and snow melting away, then we get more warming of the peatlands and the wetlands. They're famous because they produce a lot of methane. So with a warming Arctic, we get those subarctic wetlands producing more and more methane. The permafrost, of course, is a huge fear, always been a huge fear on global warming for decades, because the permafrost, we now know, holds more carbon, potential carbon, in its cold storage, which is now thawing, as it in the atmosphere. A lot more carbon than is in the atmosphere, in actual fact. So we get these tipping points. The scientists call them cascading. So we get loss of sea ice, more warming, loss of snow, more warming. They're about equal, actually. More methane from warming peatlands and wetlands, more methane from thawing permafrost. There's also, of course, the big fear of methane from methane hydrates. And they get a lot of attention because they're potentially the worst of all catastrophes. That's pure methane gas in a frozen solid state under the seafloor. It's all around the continents, but it's particularly vulnerable in the Arctic, because in the Arctic methane hydrate is shallower more than anywhere else. So when we're talking tipping points, as a scientist, our first thought goes to the Arctic. We've got to make sure the Arctic doesn't run away with us. And that's what we're looking at right now, actually. But then, of course, we've got the Amazon. The Amazon, of course, being huge rainforest, is a massive carbon sink. It absorbs huge amounts of carbon dioxide. And we've feared for a long time that there could be a tipping point in the Amazon. The science has gone backwards and forwards on that. The science now, unfortunately, is telling us that, yeah, there's a big tipping point on the Amazon. And it's getting more and more droughts, more and more drying. The Amazon is very special, of course. It's a rainforest that makes its own weather, literally makes its own regional weather. Global warming, global surface warming is drying out the Amazon. And it's getting more droughts than it's had before, and the droughts are severer and last longer. And when the Amazon undergoes a drought, we now know that the carbon sink, the taking up of carbon dioxide by the Amazon, that switches to a carbon source. And instead of taking up carbon, which is a benefit to us in all life, keeps our climate stable, climate stabilization is the key word here, right? We have to have a stable climate. In our complicated science, we tend to sort of lose sight of that simple reality. A stable climate is essential for survival and absolutely essential for civilization. So the Amazon, and then there's tipping points in the monsoon, Indian monsoon, so that's another bad one. We've got about a dozen major tipping points around the world. And the thing about the tipping points is that once they've started to go, we can't stop them. Things are out of our control then. And they all make climate change worse. So I've described the Amazon one. In their own way, all the tipping points are the same. They go into a huge different state, and the different state is one that harms the climate more than even industrial civilization is harming it. So tipping points is very important. When you say abandon, I assume, Shelley, you're talking to the threat, which appears to be somewhat more than a threat now, that the United States is going to withdraw under the Trump administration from the Paris Agreement. The United States withdrawing from the Paris Agreement is a lot less damaging, dangerous than what the United States Trump administration has done already. Already, it's just mind-boggling how fast this administration has acted. No American administration, no matter what it intended to do, has ever moved as fast as the Trump administration. In fairness, I suppose I should say that President Trump told us throughout the election what he was going to do. He had a website, Trump for President. On the website, he didn't have environment, he didn't have climate change, nor does he have environment and climate change as a leading important policy situation on the White House. You go to the White House, website and find out what the important issues are. Environment isn't there, let alone climate change. So his Trump for President platform was the same. Quote, I will unleash the $56 trillion worth of shale, oil and natural gas, and 200 years worth of coal. Is, and that's now in the White House's official American government policy. That's a death sentence for the planet. It's bad enough now. We are literally at all kinds of tipping points right now. America making the switch to at least telling the world and acknowledging the world that climate change was the most serious problem that we'd ever had, even if it could have been doing a lot more about it. Now, an American government which is saying that climate change is nothing that matters. It's not an issue. It's not dangerous. We can forget about it and ignore it so that we can export and all the fossil fuels that we can, so so that we can frack America, right? So that we can persuade the rest of the world, right, to develop on coal. So that's what we're getting now from America. Oh, this is so dangerous, so dangerous. So I did want to say that. They've already done terrible things, right? They've taken down the EPA. Imagine that, they've just taken down the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that was set up by a Republican president in 1972, Richard Nixon, right? Done all kinds of fantastic work. They've been doing great work on climate change. Not their own research, public communication that we've been talking about. The EPA has moved well on that, right? The Trump Republican administration, I want to make sure that people understand this isn't just a Trump problem. The Republican platform for the last election was exactly the same as this Republican platform in short that I've just quoted. So we now have the American government dismantling decades of environmental protection and decades of progressive protection and research and work on what is the issue of all times, which we call global climate change. It's atmospheric greenhouse gas pollution, it's carbon dioxide, it's methane, it's nitrous oxide. Our civilization has developed so that we're pumping out this stuff constantly, continually. We now know, thanks to the wonderful work done by the people around the world on renewable energy, we now know that we don't need to do this. One of the things I've been trying to communicate to the public is that there's no future with fossil fuels. Science is definite on that. Zero carbon is the law of physics on climate change. So we have to get to zero, right? No future with fossil fuels. And look what the American government is doing. Pushing them to the maximum. As I say, it's a death sentence for the planet. The American government is putting the planet on death row, literally, you know? It is far worse than the impression being given by the media. The media are doing a good job on communicating all the problems with the Trump administration, but it's way worse than people actually realize. So the Paris Agreement, so it looks increasingly like the Trump administration is going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. We had the Bush administration withdrawing from Kyoto, you remember. So it's a Republican Party tradition. The Paris Agreement is a voluntary, non-binding agreement. So it's not a good agreement in that sense. The agreements have always been written in terms of commitments. And they're based on a convention that goes way back to 1992. That was the UN Climate Convention Agreement. That agreement requires the industrialized nations very specifically. It's a requirement of a convention. It's a legally binding treaty. It requires them to control their greenhouse gas emissions so that greenhouse gas concentrations do not reach a dangerous level. I'm stressing that because that's never been done. I work on greenhouse gas concentrations as my priority. Surface temperature warming is next in importance. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations are all important, right? So the Paris Agreement does one good thing, okay? And it's a very big thing. It listened to the, what is a small majority in the United Nations of the least developed nations and the most vulnerable nations, who for years have been appealing for their survival that the 2°C limit be abandoned for a limit of under 1.5 degrees C. Now, I know, and we know, that we all need that now. We're not going to survive on 2 degrees C. It's out of the question. So we all have to aim for under 1.5 degrees C. And the Paris Agreement kept that. Not only that, but since the Paris Agreement has been made, the scientists have got more and more and more behind the 1.5 degrees C limit. And that's great, because the 2 degrees C limit goes back to 1996. We know way more about climate change and ocean acidification and the effects on forests, etc., and the effects on our agriculture than we did then. Everything is a lot worse than we thought, 15, 20 years ago. So 1.5 degree is great. As the media are quite correctly saying, if the Trump administration pulls out of Paris, it does two awful things. One is it's a huge message to the market to go with fossil fuels. And I mean, the words don't describe how bad that is, I mean, that's a crime of unimaginable proportion, right? The other thing is they give a message to the rest of the world, particularly the developing world, and that message is burn coal. So the Paris Agreement, the terrible effects of pulling out are actually more indirect than direct, but they're big. They're very big. CO2 for the planet and for humanity and for our civilization, it's a matter of literal life or death, right? CO2, the greenhouse gases control our climate. The concentrations of our greenhouse gases, they go up and down over hundreds of thousands of years, but they keep the planet in a stable balance so that life has prospered, right? We've never actually had more life on the planet as we have now, even though we're killing it off fast. Industrial civilization is killing life off faster than it's ever been killed off before, but still we have more life than ever before. And that's thanks to the stable climate. Atmospheric carbon dioxide is the key controller of that. So carbon dioxide is responsible for at least 2/3 of our global warming now. The other side of the coin is that a stable level of CO2, under 350 parts per million, a stable level is what keeps the planet stable and allows life to prosper. But not only that, I talked about understanding food security and agriculture. The greatest human invention is agriculture. And that was invented in various regions of the planet about 10,000 years ago. And we know that that was because we're in an unusually stable period of climate in the past 10, 11, 12,000 years. Very stable, very unusual, very good. So we're sort of killing the goose that lays the golden egg right now, right? Pretty dumb. And so CO2 does that. The other important thing about CO2, of course, is the oceans. So the oceans have to have the right amount of heat to function, the right amount of heat for the circulations to go and the oceans to keep healthy, and the food supply to be distributed in the oceans. This is planet ocean, of course, not planet Earth. It's the oceans that ultimately decide the climate and the amount of climate change that happens. 95% of our living space is oceans. It's not just 72% surface. It goes down 2 and 3 miles, okay? So another thing that I've been doing in the conferences is making sure that I stress ocean stability as well as climate stability in what I talk about. Right now, CO2, of course, CO2 today is at a break our future situation. We're in an awful situation with regard to CO2. It should be 350 parts per million or below. Its limit over the past 800,000 years, we know because of our ice cores, has been 300. It's never been above 300, right? I'm going to ask the scientists what they think the carbon dioxide concentration is today, because they're going to be shocked. 1 week ago, atmospheric carbon dioxide shot up to about 410 parts per million. So we're talking about way more than a 30% increase over our 800,000 year limit. And it is shooting up faster, not only than it ever has before in the past million years. There's research out that CO2 is now increasing at a faster rate than it ever has in the entire history of the Earth. Intuitively, people are going to understand that that is climate crazy danger. You know, you don't have to be a climate scientist to really understand that if you put the carbon dioxide level to a limit that it's never been before in 15 to 20 million years, which is what 406 parts per million that the stable level is right now, and if you push ocean acidification at a 20 million year high, that's not good for the planet. That's a planet-killing situation. That's what we're on. We need stable CO2. We need to stop CO2 increasing like today, right? And that is the big emergency, right? CO2 is climbing faster than it ever has before. That's my perfect question, Shelley. Okay, one of the things I like to talk about, all right, is I tend to talk about the numbers and the data because that's what I do, but I really like to talk about the switch from fossil fuels, the 100% conversion from fossil fuel energy to total, clean, renewable, safe, and everlasting renewable energy gives humanity a golden future. It's guaranteed a golden future if we make that switch. The energy is literally unlimited, right? Okay? Not only that, the more we produce, the price goes down. We're seeing that already. Price of renewable energy is just, this is one of the reasons why it's cost competitive against fossil fuel energy, even though our darn governments are subsidizing fossil fuel energy worldwide to the tune of trillions of dollars a year. Public needs to get onto that, right? They really need to get onto that one. Because if we stop the fossil fuel subsidies, bang, the world economy will turn on a dime, right? And we'll have so much more billions of dollars poured into renewable energy. Renewable energy guarantees us this golden future, right? The more, the problem has always been with fossil fuel energy, of course, you know, the price goes up and up and up because it's a resource that gets less and less and less, you know. Now we're doing the ultimate insanity, right, of digging it up as tar sands and fracking for oil as well as gas, you know. Nothing could be worse than fracking. Oh, God. Actually, the public are very good on fracking. There's a very good activist group worldwide, you know, working hard to oppose fracking, to stop fracking. Fracking's got to stop tomorrow, you know. So the golden age, our leaders are robbing us of that right now. They're throwing our future, our entire future away, because there's zero future with any fossil fuel energy. But not only that, they're throwing away the best age that humanity has ever imagined. That's the time we're living in today. So yeah, the best of times, the worst of times, I guess I can't think of anything better that could describe that. Although the worst of times is unimaginably bad. What's going to happen if people like the Trump administration and the administration in Australia, etc., if these people have their way for this criminally insane greed, you know, of just carry on with the fossil fuels because then our friends can make more money. They don't like this idea, by the way. The big corporate leaders don't like this idea of renewable energy because it's widely distributed, right? Everybody gets to have a share of renewable energy. You can't control renewable energy, right? That's why they don't like it, you know. Hasn't got that nasty aspect of political power, right? When our crops start failing, there's no going back. Climate change is irreversible. It's forever. And that takes us back to CO2, which is something I should have mentioned, Shelley. The scientists coined a very, very good phrase. Paper came out in 2008. The phrase was, carbon dioxide is forever. And it literally actually is, because carbon dioxide doesn't react chemically in the atmosphere. It hangs around in the atmosphere forever until it gets converted to, guess what? Fossil carbon, coal, oil, gas, which we know takes millions of years. So millions of years is it's a time scale on which carbon dioxide lasts. It lasts hundreds of thousands of years. That's what the last assessment of the IPCC documented. So another figure is that 20% of CO2 that we emit is still in the atmosphere 1,000 years from today, heating the surface of the planet, acidifying the oceans, right? So therefore, it follows that climate change is not something we can reverse. It's forever, right? If our crops are allowed to start going into decline, and in many regions it's happening already, it's unimaginably bad, you know. And my generation, the grey power, so-called, we really have to tell people the truth about this, and we really have to force these crazy politicians to get real or get out. It's unimaginably bad, or it's unimaginably good, really. This is all about our Earth. It's all about our great, glorious, wonderful Earth. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.